This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by new Averio herbicide from FMC, the first pre-seed burn down in Western Canada to combine Group 27 and Group 14 modes of action for powerful broad-spectrum control of the toughest broadleaf weeds. Ask your local retailer today to find out more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition. How is it already Friday already? Here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. And thank you so much for making us part of your day. And a big shout out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We've got some big news, by the way. Now, for some of you Canadians listening on the podcast, you're like, well, where did Rural Radio go? Well, Rural Radio is back on the air January 16th in Canada. Really appreciate Rural Radio and Sirius XM bringing Rural Radio 147 back to Canadian farmers and ranchers across the country. We really do appreciate it, and we are super excited. So for all you podcast listeners out there, you can tune in again January 16th. Of course, in the U.S., we have not gone anywhere. We've been on the air the entire time. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call or text the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. We got a great show for you here today. We'll be joined by Stephen Heckbert. He's the Executive Director at the Canadian Pork Council. He's going to join our panel in just a few minutes here. But let's bring in the panel right now and introduce them. Up first, Lyndsey Smith, coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are we doing?
We're doing well. How are you doing, Shaun?
Doing really good. This week has flown by. I had a great time. I went to the Fiesta Bowl last night, and I know you're not a big college football fan, but my son and I went, and it was maybe one of the greatest football games I've ever been to in my life. It was amazing. It was so good.
It just sounds like lunch to me. It's a Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah. And then they would do on the PA system, they would do like these rhymes, and I can't even replicate it, but like things that rhyme with Fiesta, like they played on the word. Yeah. Yeah. It was good. And yeah, Dierks Bentley did a concert out in the parking lot before the game, which was really, I figure they should have Lee Bryce because he has the song Parking Lot Party. That would be a little bit more apropos. But Dierks Bentley was fantastic. It was a lot of fun.
Maybe let the planners for next year know.
I will let the Fiesta Bowl Planning Committee know all about that. Also joining us today is Stuart Person. He's out of Edmonton, Alberta. He is with MNP. How are we doing today, Stuart?
Doing good, Shaun. I missed the Fiesta Bowl because I was busy watching the Oilers beat the Jets again.
Not hard. Who hasn't beaten the Jets?
That's right. I do feel bad, actually, for our friends in Manitoba.
Well,
it's not good.
I'm in a text group with a bunch of guys from Manitoba, the big Jets fans. And their question has now become, what happened to this team?
Yeah.
Like, they were in the second round last year. Like, what is this?
I was texting a couple of my colleagues from Manitoba last night asking if there's any way we could maybe rent Hellebuck for the rest of the year.
Well, and Lyndsey, let me tell you, the Ottawa Senators full of controversy.
Why? Come on. Do we have to mention this?
Do you think it's true that the goalie that's on leave was ratting out players for cheating on their wives? This is a rumor I heard yesterday.
You know what? That's a great rumor. And actually, right now, I will tell you that hockey gossip is having a moment, as is hockey culture, with heated rivalry. So check it out, everybody. Anyway, might not be most people's cup of tea, I'll be honest. But still, yeah. So Ottawa is, it's an interesting place right now. So I'm not watching a lot of hockey right now, I'll be honest.
Senators aren't very good either.
No, it's kind of painful. So
tough year for Canadian hockey. The Leafs are brutal. Maybe
except for Stuart's bright spot. You know?
Well, but it's been a rough start for the Oilers. The Oilers are just kind of doing their thing, and now, Stuart, they're kind of coming around, right?
Yeah.
Coming around, but they're literally, I think, 3 or 4 points from being out of the playoffs. So it's pretty tight in that Western Conference.
Yeah.
Other than the top 3 teams in the Central, it's pretty strong.
Yeah. Well, You know what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a number of different issues. We got Prime Minister Carney going to China. We're going to talk about farm profitability. I've got to call him out about are there ways to make land more affordable and drop some of the barriers? I'm not sure we have good solutions, but we definitely got stuff to talk about. That and a whole lot more. Let's take a break. When we come back, we got Stephen Heckbert joining us from Canadian Pork Council right after this. Canadian grain farmers compete every day in a global marketplace, but when it comes to information, we're not competing on a level playing field. Information is infrastructure. That's why SAS Crops and APAS are calling for a federal export sales reporting program to give Canadian farmers the data they need to compete and succeed. I want to invite Jeremy Welter to talk about why this topic is important to farmers.
We like to think that we live in a free market society, but the asymmetrical nature of grain marketing is such that farmers and the industry at large doesn't have access to the same type and amount of data that some of our international competitors have. It puts us at a competitive disadvantage. If we don't know what's going on, if the railways don't know what's happening, it makes actually transporting the grain from our country terminal storage system, it just creates a lot more challenges, and it makes it far more difficult for us to be really viewed as a reliable supplier on the world stage. Canadian producers are competing with producers in other jurisdictions. When we are lacking a tool that they've long had, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM for the RealAg Issues Panel. Of course, we've got Stuart Person from MMP, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, and myself. And we've got a guest. We're bringing in a guest here for segment 2. We've got Stephen Heckbert, who is the Executive Director at the Canadian Pork Council, and he joins us. How are we doing today, Stephen?
Doing excellent. Thanks very much. I hope I'm helpful, and I'll try not to get too in the way too often.
It's great to chat with you again. You've been on the show before, and there's a lot happening in the pork industry indeed right now, and 2026 is going to be another busy one for sure. What we wanted to have you in today is to talk about Prime Minister Carney's trip to China. And I guess, first of all, do you expect pork trade to be a topic that gets addressed? Of course, there are tariffs out of China on Canadian pork. And what outcome are you asking for?
Well, first of all, Shaun and all, thanks for having me, and Happy New Year. Secondly, I guess I would say I want to manage expectations for folks. First and foremost, I suspect pork will come up, but I don't suspect we'll see much movement on any of the tariffs or any of the conversations. I think we have to accept that this is the first chance for Canada to have a bit of a reset with the Chinese government. So it's going to be the first leader-to-leader conversation that they've had in quite some time between a Canadian leader and Xi Jinping. So I think it's going to be quite important for us to sort of keep in mind that, it's been since Prime Minister Harper that a Canadian Prime Minister has sat down and had a one-on-one conversation with the Chinese leadership. So just in terms of, for agricultural producers out there who are hoping that on, January 17th, we're going to see a complete sort of change to the tariff situation, I don't know that that's entirely realistic. I think what is realistic out of this is that we'll have a sense from this conversation about the role Canada has decided to play in terms of how do we intend to cooperate on a fairly transactional basis with one of the world's soon to be largest economy.
Lyndsey?
So, there's so many things to unpack here. I appreciate though, Stephen, like where this sort of comes from in that, I mean, you're right. It's been since, I think it's 2017 since there's been a leader to leader meeting between Canada and China. So, I mean, this is a long time to sort of repair that level of discussion, right? So I guess, I hear your, perhaps measured optimism and that this is really just an opening and a reset. But thinking longer term, like how important is this market to the Canadian pork industry, and what I mean, obviously no tariffs would be great, but is that realistic?
So it's our third largest market, Lyndsey. It is incredibly important to us. Having said that, this market buys product that no other market will buy in that kind of volume. So from that perspective, we're a bit, I won't say limited, but certainly like the Philippines would also buy some of that product. There are also other decisions we could make in terms of trying to move some of that product. For example, if we got into pork cheeks, and started to want to sort of market pork cheeks in a different way, we certainly would have some decisions to make around would we start to debone heads. But I think that, the larger question is, it's the third largest market. It's about 450 million for us this year. China is now our largest export market, and the United States is second. I think in some respects, I will be honest, I think the pork industry is fortunate that we've already diversified our trade into a variety of global partners. I don't think we've ever relied solely on one market, at least not in recent times, in a way that has. We've gone through this before, right? If you go back 20 years ago, Russia was our largest export market, right? And then during the pandemic, China was our largest export market. But one of the things that's different about China that I think we all have to also keep in mind is they push super hard to have a domestic pork industry that can supply their market entirely.
Yeah.
And they continue to invest in that domestic pork market. I mean, they're hit with ASF, and it's endemic in China at the moment. So they may never be able to get to a fully domestic production will satisfy domestic demand. But that's not something that's happening in other markets, and it's not something that other markets will be capable of doing. So from that perspective, we also have to keep in mind that we're always going to have to be a bit opportunistic in the Chinese market. We're always going to have to be a bit, we'll sell them what we can sell them when we can sell it to them. But, it's a different political model, and it's a different kind of trading relationship we're always going to have with China.
Hey, Stuart?
I guess my question would be, if we do get a positive outcome, and like you said, it might be baby steps to begin with, and then we work towards something bigger. Given the nature of the relationship between China and the United States, how do you see that impacting our trade in Canada with the United States if something good comes out of a new deal with China?
These are all $64,000 questions, Stuart, and they're a little bit out of my pay grade. Having said that, here's what I would anticipate in pork. Our relationship with the U.S. pork industry, with our partners at the National Pork Board and at the National Pork Producers Council, are as good as our relationships with anyone in the world. We have quite a strong relationship with both those organizations. We understand the interreliance between our markets in a way that I got to honestly admit, I would love for policymakers on both sides of the border to understand.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think I don't think much changes with our relationship with the United States, no matter what happens between the U.S. and China or us and China, largely because I think logic has entered the equation, at least in the pork industry, which I applaud us for, by the way. I think I think we're fortunate that we think of these things in a logical way. And so I do not see that we're going to see a big reaction to that, because I think both sides of the border know that the relationship with China will always be what I would call transactional. It's never going to be a partnership in the way that the relationship across the border between Canada and the United States is a partnership.
Yeah. Lyndsey, you had a question?
Yeah. So just to sort of pull two of these threads kind of together. So you mentioned, how the pork industry has had to sort of diversify over the past few decades. And we do see now that we have a prime minister that's headed to China after a long time. From this government on the trade file, like it does seem like, the Carney government is at least trying to pick up the trade discussion more so than we saw for probably the past 10 years. So what would you like to see as far as the focus of where we put our energy policy-wise on that trade front, on that trade file at the federal level?
Great question. So, and this is, I'm going to go off the board a little bit. I'd like us to focus everywhere all at once, all at the same time. I think in part what it is that from our perspective in pork, I think we have to look at the available pork markets around the world, and I think we have to understand that some of these are going to be emerging markets. Some of these are going to be markets where we're going to have to invest with the government of Canada to try to tell the Canadian pork story in a more direct and probably direct way to their buyers and to their consumers. And I'm going to give you an example that's completely off the board, but we're going to talk about it because I do think it's important. So the India market, not a ton of pork consumed there right now. But every day in India, there's 30 million people visiting India. Their hospitality industry market is as big as the Canadian market. So do those people eat bacon for breakfast? They sure do. Are there 100 million expat Chinese living in India? There sure are. And so is there a market in India for pork? There is. Is someone satisfying that market and we don't know who it is? Absolutely. But I've heard from Canadian producers and processors that, boy, India is not much of a market today. That's true. But if it becomes a market and we've missed the window because we didn't want to invest in trying to build the market, that's on us. And so if we ignore the market because the Americans are going to sort of invest in it or the Danish are going to invest in it, that's going to be a problem. And it means we will have once again not taken advantage of a new trading relationship that I think we're going to build with India. And I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of look around the world and say, are there emerging markets that might be attractive to us? Vietnam's another example, right? I've heard folks say, oh, Vietnam. Look, it's 100 million people. The Philippines is 100 million people. And both of those are 2.5 times the size of Canada. And they both eat pork in the Philippines and in Vietnam. We had some growth in the Philippines, and I think we can have some growth in Vietnam, but I think it's important for us to say there are markets that we're not going to automatically be profitable for us in the beginning. But how did we build China? We built China through a long-standing commitment to meeting the Chinese market with the product it wanted, and we sort of modified our production based upon sort of what the Chinese were what the Japanese were asking for us for. We're now the number one export partner with Japan. And I think that kind of commitment is proof that a long-term strategy is better than trying to be a short-term mercenary price taker.
Stephen, just to finish up here, two-parter. Maybe you mentioned it, but I missed it. What are these Chinese tariffs on Canadian pork costing the industry? And second to that, from a timeline perspective, you mentioned that we shouldn't have an assumption that these tariffs are going to be lifted on this trip. Are we more on from a pork perspective and canola perspective, are we more on a timeline of what beef has been dealing with? That atypical case of BSE was in December of 21, and trade has not reopened. Are we on that kind of trajectory, or should we have higher hopes than that?
So I think we can have different hopes. I wouldn't go with them as higher hopes. I don't want to sort of quantify what kind of hope we should have. But I think so, and I do think I don't want to separate us from canola because obviously agricultural products I don't think they should be lumped in with an overall trade dispute. I think food security for every country. I'd love to see a global agreement that we're going to not use agricultural products as part of a trade dispute, because I do think it just ends up hurting domestic consumers when you have these kinds of tariffs. So our tariffs and canola tariffs are a little bit different. Ours are 25%. It is a cost to the Canadian industry. I don't think I could quantify it exactly, but let's go with it's probably $100 million or more that's left on the table because we have to cover those tariffs. And so that has a value for sure. But there's really no other market that it would be as attractive as China for us for those products. And so from that perspective, we're also, we're a bit price takers. So I think that's part of our overall long-term perspective has to be what can we do as an industry to move from being simply another commodity provider, perhaps a higher quality commodity, but from being just another commodity provider into being a strategic long-term partner that's going to help other countries meet their national security, food security objectives. And I think if we can do that, I think we'll move ourselves up the value chain, and we won't be just simply another country that sells us pork. We're buying Canadian pork. And so I'm avoiding the question a little bit in terms of when do I see a timeline for China, largely because, again, let's be honest about it, and the Chinese have been incredibly honest about this. This isn't about pork. This is about EV tariffs. And so, do I know what the government of Canada and the government of the United States intend to do on EV tariffs? I don't. I also think it's important, though, Shaun, to remind American listeners that Canada put EV tariffs on Chinese vehicles at the request of the United States government. And we did it in partnership and in lockstep with the government of the United States. And so we got hit with a tariff that we incurred because of our partnership with our southern neighbors and friends. And I think it's important for folks, and I will say this, look, it's hard to remember everything, but these tariffs are on Canadian pork because of our actions in line with the government of the United States.
We've been talking to Stephen Heckbert. He is Executive Director at the Canadian Pork Council. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it.
No problem. Excellent. Thanks, Shaun, and thanks, everybody, and hope your days all go excellently.
Absolutely. Great perspectives for sure. It's great to have Stephen on the show. We'll be back with more of RealAg Radio right after this.
Summer cypress, fireweed, burning bush, railroad weed, red belvedere. With more aliases than Jason Bourne and a reputation for developing resistance, kochia, one of the most invasive and destructive weeds in the world. Thankfully, there's Corex 2, a pre-seed herbicide from Corteva. Save your cereals with 2 powerful modes of action and the ability to add glyphosate to control kochia and other difficult broadleaf weed. Ask for Corex 2 at your local retailer.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
And we're back here on RealAg Radio. We're RealAg Issues Panel. Today we just talked to Stephen Heckbert from Canadian Pork Council about this Prime Minister Carney's trip to China on the invitation of President Xi, I should say. I think that's an important piece or component of this story. Stuart, I think what Stephen said is honest, is very honest, to be clear with you. I think he's not trying to set some sort of crazy expectation for people's hopes to get high and then for be stolen. Sort of like the Oilers going to the finals the past 2 years. You know all about your heart being stolen. But I do think that I'm questioning whether or not we need to be putting more firmness on the Canadian team that's headed over to China to be like, you know what, we patience is not a virtue here. We really need this rectified. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the pork industry's got challenges with this. So does the canola industry, as we all know. And I think as a canola producer myself and as somebody who works with a lot of canola producers, we need to get this trade thing resolved sooner than later. It's hard to know exactly how it's impacting the market, but it has to be impacting the market for us here in Canada when we don't have one of our major buyers at the table. So, and as we start to see the results come through for this past year, it's very evident that profitability is being pressured significantly by this issue. And so hopefully this delegation goes over and, as Stephen said, at least gets the ball rolling. But it would be nice if they could go further than that if possible, or get the next meeting fairly quickly after and see if we can get some resolution to this.
Yeah, if only all the areas of agriculture could be like the beef business is right now. But we had Patrick Kuntz on the Farmer Rapid Fire yesterday, and he made the point like prices have been good, not complaining, but trying to get my head wrapped around all the risk right now as a cattle feeder, even with some of the profits out there, is a real thought. Lyndsey, we've been talking a lot internally about some of the concerns out there on the cropping side from coast to coast when it comes to profitability.
Well, and north-south too, right? And we have sort of, similar tales for Canada and the U.S., slight differences, but still, and, as Stuart points out, sort of those, yes, China is an issue for pork, but it's much bigger of an issue for canola. But we don't necessarily know just how big of an issue it's going to be, because here we are, we're sitting early January. We've got a bit of time before seed goes in the ground. We've got a bit of time before, but like, the countdown is on here. Like the amount of negative impact this has over time just ends up getting worse and worse and worse. There's a window here to maybe take some of that uncertainty and some of that pressure off. But when we layer all the different things, and this is something, this week and the coverage at RealAgriculture.com, we are so focused on, cost of production and grain price outlooks and these sorts of things. And there are layers and levels of pressure on margins this year. And so having something like this gigantic tariff from China is just one of those very heavy ones that really, if we could at least in some way deal with that, could mean that, that's a one stress off, doesn't necessarily address all sorts of other issues to profitability this year, but at least it be one fewer. So, I'm hopeful we'll see some initial, positive language that comes out of next week's meeting. A reminder, it's the 13th to the 17th that Carney is there. And yes, I know it's a start, but we really don't have a lot of time here before we need to see at least some movement, maybe not full, but some. And I want to say before we move on, we talked about this late last year, Shaun, like internally as well, and as well on the show about these EV tariffs, that if ever there had been a window for Carney to be like, okay, yes, we'll take them off, it was either then or maybe it's now. And so I am curious to see if we see any movement at all. Like, it's just such a complicated dynamic and push and pull. Really, is it a push and pull? No, Canada is wedged like a little pebble between two giant rocks. Let's be honest. And so it is a very precarious situation for us. But ultimately, I mean, China has said if those EV tariffs are gone, maybe all the other ones are too. So
yeah, I think I don't know if right now is a good time. Like, I think in the 2-week period where, Secretary Bessent and President Trump were really doing the victory lap about, some sort of easing of trade tensions with China, that was the window. I don't know what the window looks like right now. And maybe it is. I'm not going to speak for what the White House is going to think. To me, that was a really great window to do so. Now, Stuart, one of the things I've been doing just talking to a lot of people in this space around farm profitability in Canada and the U.S. And one of the things I continue to hear and learn about is farmers tend to think that a lot of the separation in cost is about what I bought, what I bought my fertilizer and my seed and my variable costs, my inputs in comparison to my neighbors. But that's actually not where the real, over the long term, that's not the real difference. And I think at MMP, I want to get your perspective on this. You guys focus a lot on labor, power, and machinery and how that's the spot that makes the difference. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons we focus so much on it in the last few years is that it's gone up significantly. If you look at the numbers that we're seeing, it's probably I wish I had the data in front of me, but it's probably about a 50% increase in the last 5 years. A lot of that's driven by machinery prices and when we had the big commodity price spike where grain prices were really good, there was a lot of buying of machinery going on at that time because confidence was super high. And so all of those machines are now in on the farm in use, and the amortization on those machines is hitting the books, and it's making that number a lot higher. So, that's a big one. Labor costs are also going up with inflation. And there's a number of other costs in that labor power machinery category that are impacted by inflation as well. So that category has gone up significantly. I would say land building and finance, which is the next category, also has increased because of the land prices continuing to raise, which also rises the rent if it follows along suit. And then interest rates have been rising as well. So that category is also under significant pressure. And both of those categories are more of like your fixed costs. They're just there. They don't necessarily jump around like fertilizer and seed and chemical will. So the key there is, if you're going to have a high cost structure in your labor power machinery and your land building and finance sections of your income statement, you need a much larger gross margin at the end of the day to cover those costs. And so if fertilizer is stubbornly high at the same time, it just makes it that much harder to get that gross margin, especially with commodity prices falling. So it's a perfect storm right now to create a lot of pressure. We're seeing a lot of red ink coming across our desks with the statements from last year. There's some farmers that made money last year, but a lot of farmers are in the red.
Lyndsey?
Yeah, I just wanted to add Calvin Heckbert, who is suspiciously absent today. No, it's fine. But he was at Manitoba, the St. Jean Farm Days this week. And Darren Bond of Manitoba Agriculture did an entire presentation on cost of production and some of these comparisons. And there's really key stuff in there that Kevin will share, and some really great slides. But one of the key points is, Stuart, as you point out, the inflation of the cost of production versus 2022 to now is like 45 to 55%. Depending on the crop. And whereas like the CPI sort of like overall inflation in the economy is like around 20. So the actual cost of production for our crops has the inflation of that cost has doubled compared to everything else. So there's some really key numbers in there as well about, like, to Stuart's point about gross margin, if crop prices were better, this would be a lot easier to manage. But they're just it's sort of this perfect storm of one side going up and the other side going down at the same time.
And I think the other part of it is when you talk about the fixed cost side, so the labor power machinery and land building and finance, those are all costs that you as the producer have an opportunity to manage them. You can do something about it. You can look at it and make decisions. When it comes to fertilizer, chemical, and seed, there's not a lot you can do to impact the price of what you're doing there. You can maybe make sure your timing is better in terms of getting that pricing, but I mean, you're not able to do it. The only way you are able to reduce, say, a fertilizer cost outside of taking advantage of a price drop is to cut fertilizer. And then if you cut your fertilizer application to the point where it impacts your yield, you're likely ending up with a negative result on your gross margin anyway. So cutting fertilizer at is not usually, unless your agronomist is telling you to do that, I wouldn't recommend cutting fertilizer, because you're just lowering the potential of your profit if you don't put enough fertilizer on to grow the crop that could have been there if the weather cooperated, right? So
how many planters or seeders do you need to cover those acres? Like those kind of those productivity efficiencies, and man hours required to get the crop in, like the handling of the labor component. Like there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. That's the management. Like when we talk about farm management, I think a lot of times we jump to like succession, and like there's strategic management, but then there's operational management, and that trying to hone in and improve your operational excellence, that's really a key at times like this, where it's really important. Go ahead, Lyndsey.
Well, like, and I think, Stuart, to your point about like those big numbers like land and equipment and labor, et cetera, like those are stickier, right? Because once you buy a piece of equipment or whatever, like it's not easy to necessarily unload it, and you may not want to. It may have increased your operational efficiency, so it is adding to the bottom line. But like on Monday on The Agronomist, this was the topic, was like, how do we make sure our agronomy dollars go as far as they can? And there are things like, one of the key things that Rob Miller pointed out, Peter Sikkema has done a lot of this work, that you can actually essentially lose 15 to 20% of your herbicide dollar just by spraying at the wrong time. And that's time of day. That's not just like timing on those weeds. So it really, like, in this overall, reduced profitability or very thin margins, the management, like the key details of doing the best job of each of these jobs, so seeding and planting, spraying, all those sorts of things, you can actually, save yourself 5%, 10%, 20% if you're bang on with some of these things. But like, that has to be part of the plan from the beginning.
Yeah. And on the top end, like we're, in ranching where things have been, financially really good. Let's be honest. And after many years of not being the case, it's well deserved and well timed. Back in October, we asked ranchers in our Real Agri Studies research, do you intend to start to rebuild your herd? And 15% said yes. With how much money has been made and reasonably the weather conditions that we have in Western Canada, I was actually surprised that number was only 15%. Like, what is it going to take for people to want to step out? I think the problem is the inventory is so expensive. It's like, is now the right time? Like, there's a lot of big time decisions being made in ranching where you're at the top end of the profitability index that are just as challenging and could have just as many long-term consequences as if you're growing corn in southwestern Ontario and you're looking at the big red that's on your income statement. So it's a fascinating time, no easy answers, and very challenging for many of you out in the audience. And we it's tough. Go ahead, Stuart.
One thing I would comment for ranchers is, these times of significant profits, especially for the cow-calf operators right now, take advantage of that in your business risk management strategy, especially around the use of the AgriStability program. This is the time, if you weren't in it or you're not in it, you need to be going into that program, because that program is designed to look at your history and protect you based on your history. And guess what? Your history is looking pretty good now when you start looking back a couple of years. So all the grain farmers that were back in the 22, 23 bubble, those grain farms now are collecting fairly, significant AgriStability payments in 24 and 25 with these grain prices down to where they are and the cost of production increases that we've seen in that time frame. If you're a cattle producer, get into that program now, because if that price does drop, let's hope it doesn't. Let's hope they have a nice long run. But if it does drop, then you will be set up quite nicely to have a pretty good risk management support there from the AgriStability program.
Okay, we got to take a break. Great point. The benchmarks reset. Right, you've reset that level. That's a really good point. Okay, we're gonna take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio right after this.
There's power, and then there's superpower. Advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from New Farm. Take control. Eliminate weed competition and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to newfarm.ca/burndown.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We got a great RealAg Issues panel, myself, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, as well as Stuart Person of MNP. Okay, we did a piece on RealAgriculture.com. We kind of talked about this in our year wrap-up episode. How would we grade Minister McCauley in 2025?
MacDonald.
Sorry, I said Macaulay again, didn't I?
You did.
Mr. MacDonald. Sorry about that, Minister.
It's, you know what, they are very similar from the same
Okay,
area.
but that was one of some of the feedback we got from people is that Minister MacDonald, this is a jump when it comes to compared to the last two ag ministers. So I'm like, would you call that a Freudian slip? Maybe. Anyway,
something like that. Yeah.
people gave I would say a sort of passing grade. It was like a C-ish, C+, okay? Across the people that we informally talked to. I don't want to rehash that. What I want to talk about is 2026. What do we want to see out of Minister MacDonald and the department in 2026? Lyndsey, you first.
Oh, okay. I feel like Stuart might have more to say. I think that I probably fall in line with most of the feedback in that we, certainly are appreciative of a minister that seems engaged, willing to meet, willing to travel, talk, all of those things. And I think there was, like with any ag minister who's very new to the role, there's usually, a bit of a grace period of like getting up to speed on the issues. But we are at an incredibly critical time for this country and of course for agriculture within it. And I would like to see leadership on this file. Like, we know that there's going to be some behind the scenes, we know there's going to be some decisions made potentially on budgets and on, roles and different things that are part of the budget cuts, etc. But like, we also simultaneously keep having these discussions about, how important agriculture is, how much of a economic powerhouse and all those sorts of things. And like, so then let's lead with that, because we're also in a situation where, just like in our last segment, talking very much about profitability for many being, it's going to be a pretty heavy lift for 2026. So I'd like to see some vision, some leadership, and some, a minister that believes very strongly in expanding the sector and moving the sector forward, for sure. It will be a very noisy time politically, right? I mean, we've got the CUSMA renegotiator, I don't know what we're calling it, review, I guess, that happening this year. Like, it's a, what did you call it, Shaun? A pivotal year on so many fronts.
Yeah, I think it's a real
yes. So I would like to see the minister, I would like to see him more, quite honestly, out and showing real leadership on some of these issues.
Okay, Stuart, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with Lyndsey's points. I like to see some more leadership on a number of different issues, and just in general, maybe a bit more of a tone as to how does the federal government view Canadian agriculture? What is their perception of it? What do they see? How do they see it as important to the Canadian economy and to food security and all of the things that we would talk about generally around that? There's a couple things I would obviously, we talked earlier about the trade stuff, and he does need to get going on this trade stuff. We need this canola issue resolved for us in the West for sure. Pork needs to be resolved. Pulses are also under tariffs as well right now. Aquaculture. So we've got some things that need to get resolved so that we can get back to profitable numbers in those sectors. And then a couple other things I would like to see. He alluded to this at his brief statement that he made at the CAPI conference this fall. And he talked a little bit more about on the BRM side, looking at things a bit more through the lens of farming being a business, and talking about where is the responsibility around BRM. And I'd like to get a bit more clarity from him on that. And specifically around the business side, one of the things we feel has continued to be lacking is the general understanding of BRM in the existing programming suite. So if we are going to carry on with the suite that we have, or some version of it, we need to invest in Canada in education around what BRM programming is out there right now. I feel like that's been missing for a number of years. And so I think he could do a lot of good by figuring out, how are we going to do that? How are we going to get the farming community educated on what they currently have in front of them, and then engage with us in the farming community around, okay, what we have right now, what needs to change, what things are not quite working so well, and where, do we need to make some changes here or there to do that? So I'd like to see a bit more engagement around that. The other thing I'd like is I'd like a further acknowledgement from that department on the critical issue of succession in the industry. I think we still have a big problem there in the long run, where we need to see more young people coming in, and not only just coming in and having an interest, but it needs to be economically feasible for these young folks to be able to get in here and make it happen. And I still think we have some struggles there. And so I think we need to tackle that issue in Canada to figure out, what does that look like, and what kind of support needs to be there to make sure that the young folks have a chance to get into this industry and take it through to the next generation. So
those are all great points, you guys. What comes to mind for me is I'm going to go up a level. I hope in 2026, and I don't know what's on Mr. MacDonald's mind in terms of where his key priorities for himself personally are, but I hope the PMO and the cabinet gives him the rope to do what he needs to do, right? Because you can want to take as much action as you want. I just hope that reins aren't being pulled back and saying, no, not around here, not in these parts. We don't do that around here. I hope, I'm not saying that's, I hope that he's given some runway. Attached to that is, assuming he's given the runway to take some action and do some things, I hope he makes some mistakes. And the reason I say that is because if he's making some mistakes, it means he's actually doing some things. And we're actually taking action, and we're comfortable with the fact we do not need to be perfect in our policy development around a numerous number of issues. We can make mistakes. And when I say I want him to make mistakes, I don't mean I want him to fail. We got to move forward. We got to get out of this headspace and this trapping that we're in, where the great to meet you tour is over. The parade, we did the parade. He met with so many different stakeholders, and I congratulate him on that. Now it's time to do stuff and take action and make it happen. There's going to be some wins and there's going to be some losses, and I'm okay with that.
I agree with you, Shaun, and I would maybe on a bit more of a broader statement. If you look at how the current Liberal Party is talking about making Canada an energy superpower, we should be talking in that same tone about agriculture. Why shouldn't we be an agriculture superpower? We've got an incredible land base that can service a lot more people than we have domestically, and so we should be promoting ourselves as an agriculture superpower in the world, and a very reliable and a place to get agriculture products, which we should be producing, and we are producing very safely. So our quality is super high, right? So, I think we should be telling that story. I think it is not only can Canada be an energy superpower, but we can absolutely be an agriculture superpower. And I hope he gets on board with that with the entire government.
A lot of times when you listen to mainstream radio shows, they're like at the back end of the show, there's like these 2-minute segments. They got to get through their breaks. That's us. We got to take a break. We're back right after this.
Thinking about Plant 2026, CDC Evident Durum from Alliance Seed is the clear choice with everything today's durum producers are looking for. High grain yield, strong disease resistance, and excellent end-use suitability. Built with resistance to leaf, stem, and stripe rust, along with protection against loose smut and common bunt, CDC Evident delivers the reliability and marketability growers need and the performance they expect. Learn more at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
As you look ahead to the next growing season, there's a lot to consider when it comes to your crop. You need every possible advantage available to you. The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to make the best choice for you and your farm. On-demand videos with leading industry experts, available anywhere, anytime. Go into the season confident and ready with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Lyndsey Smith, Stuart Person, myself, Shaun Haney. And we're rocking here, having a great time. Hey, Lyndsey, big news. Grain Farmers of Ontario back in the mix with the Grain Growers of Canada. That's big news.
That's
and
right.
Personally, I'm going to show my bias. I think it's great to see.
I'll show my bias too. Yes. So this brings the grain growers up to 15 different organizations. So they were at 14. Grain Farmers of Ontario, just to recap, they have been a member before. They had joined in 2018, I think when SAS Pulse joined, and one other group, an Atlantic group as well. Atlantic Grains Council, thank you. And then they had left the organization. And as a reminder, it was during the first Trump administration. The trade war with China had really screwed up soybeans, the soybean market, and GFO had decided to move on from the organization and go on their own path, but have decided, and the two have made amends, I suppose, and are going to work together. And I'll show my bias. I think it's great because I think it's a national organization. We are stronger together, especially on some of these big files. And GFO is, of course, a really important organization to be a part of that. And it is my home province too. So I'm super 2 thumbs up, guys. I think it's exciting and I think it's good news. And we'll see, I suppose, what they tackle next. But it makes for 15 grain groups that are represented by grain growers.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more national when you got GFO in that mix. And Stuart, this is kind of at a time where I think there's a lot of call for more unified action on files where people can find common ground.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great to see the GFO back in with grain growers, and we need that unity at the national level, and not just on the grain growers side, but we need it on CFA and other groups as well. Just to get everybody on board with one organization and have that single voice makes it a lot easier to push your initiatives and whatnot through that are going through on the Hill in Ottawa. So good to see. Hopefully they can gain some more traction and attract some more that are not in there yet, and then see what they can do when they're a bit more unified with their voice.
Lyndsey, we've also had a lot of movement at the executive level. We got new head of Syngenta Canada, Shaun Haney. Congratulations to him. We got a new head of 4-H Canada. Kyle Larkin has left Grain Growers of Canada. He's over at the Canadian Meat Council now. So we've had some executive movement here at the end of 25 into 26.
And Andrea Brocklebank.
Yes, another
CCA.
one.
Yeah.
Point.
So it did certainly ramp up sort of end of last year. But just this week we got news that Andrea will be CEO, which the other thing is it is a change in role for CCA. So Andrea steps in as CEO, which was not a role they had before. So they have actually sort of changed the structure a little bit, or will, when she joins. I believe it's in early March, which is also Dennis Laycraft, of course, who is the executive vice president, is retiring, is moving on. He's still there for now while they transition to this new leadership team. And Tracy Herbert will take over in the interim at BCRC, which is where Andrea was the leader at BCRC. So, and congrats to Christina Frank as well for taking on 4-H Canada as CEO. So a very busy week. That was just this week.
Well, and
pretty cool.
Congratulations to Andrea. And if you missed the Hall of Fame interview that I did with Dennis Laycraft, encourage you to do that. He's been at CCA for 40 years.
I know, it's a very long time.
40 years.
It is you know what, Shaun, to that point, anyone who's under the age of 35 probably, go and listen to it, because if you're at all in the cattle industry right now and under 35, it's like a whole world that you missed out on, that Dennis does a great job sort of explaining sort of what has sort of all gone on in the last 3 years. So.
And you know what? Andrea's going to do a great job. She is a fine alumnus of the University of Lethbridge, an institution that pumps out fantastic graduates on a yearly basis. And,
like Stuart? Wait, who was the other one? I forget.
It was me. Actually, Andrea and I were in some ag econ classes together. Hey, Stuart, thanks a lot for joining us here today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shaun.
All the best, Lyndsey.
Bye.
If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. For those of you listening on the RealAg Radio podcast, we have a bonus segment for you coming up. Thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by new Avirio herbicide from FMC. Active on tough and resistant weeds, including Group 2, 4, and 9 resistant kochia, Group 2 and 4 resistant cleavers, volunteer canola, and more. Avirio herbicide delivers powerful, broad-spectrum burn-down control. See your local retailer today.
And we are in the bonus here of RealAg Radio. You know what I didn't do, Lyndsey? I didn't do any reads.
I noticed that, and I was like, do we not have any? Oh, no, we have lots.
Well, you know what? I'm going to do Crossroads Conference. It's coming up. Alberta's Crop Conference returns January 27th to 28th in Edmonton. Join us for cutting-edge insights, new technology, and practical tools for today's farm. Grow boldly and get your tickets at crossroadscropconference.ca. Okay. Lyndsey, what did we not talk about here today? Is there anything that comes to mind?
So many things. But I am going to mention that Amber will be at Crossroads. So say hello to our Amber Bell when you're there. Sounds like a good show.
You're at Crops Forum next week in Saskatoon.
Yes, I am. So, so we should probably talk about January is a very busy month in Western Canada. And so I will be at Crop Swarm in Saskatoon. I will be there all of Wednesday. I'm around Tuesday and Thursday, but traveling those days. But very excited. I'm going to moderate a panel with 4 national organizations. So I'm super excited for that. Might get a little spicy in the questions, I think. So looking forward to that. But we'll stop in, of course, at the crop production show as well. And Amber will be there as well. And for those of you who follow us on social, you'll have seen Shaun's schedule and realize why he's not going to be there. It's that you're everywhere else. So there's that.
Next week's a busy week.
You're everywhere.
I'm in Pasco, Washington on Tuesday, speaking with the bunch of direct seeders from Oregon and Washington. Important. Wednesday in South Dakota, speaking to a bunch of ag business leaders at Sioux Falls. That's gonna be a lot of fun. And then Friday, I'm in Calgary. And Saturday, I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska. Yeah. So
just a little whoop, whoop. Yeah. There you go. So what we didn't cover, and one of the things that we sort of alluded to in our conversation, but I think I did want to touch on, is you've written a column about institutional investors in farmland.
Oh, boy.
And it is a huge topic that I think we're probably going to tackle from a few different directions. But it touches on this question of and Stuart, you mentioned this, of like new and beginning farmers, figuring out how they actually do this or how they financially can manage this. If we've got, and I know that our farmland values have, maybe the growth rate has slowed, but it hasn't stopped or reversed, at least yet, and may not. So like this question of what actually drives farmland prices, if they're way out of whack, if they are way out of whack, do we really want to do something about it, or do we let the market take care of it? Like it's just such a huge question. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been sharing it today on social media, and I've only had a couple. I didn't know you were a communist. DMs.
Okay.
So
and is this in reference to a policy that
well, it's funny because
they think you're suggesting this.
Yeah, this article came from the idea what we heard this week out of President Trump, which was. Yeah. Because land affordability and housing affordability, both issues in Canada, creating same concerns like, barriers to entry, also challenges when it comes to growth. When we think about housing, the middle class dream is, a part of your wealth creation is growing equity in your house, right? So there's some parallels. We're making more, we can build more houses, we can't build more farmland. So there are differences. But I took what President Trump said this week, where he is looking at banning institutional ownership of single family houses. He said people live in houses, not corporations. So an institutional owner is essentially like a hedge fund or a company that pools money together and will buy a whole street of houses. And obviously they could rebuild, they could rent them out. Like that happens. And a lot of times put cash into the purchase agreement. So they have an advantage in comparison to somebody that's having to do it through financing and do it through a contingent sort of deal. So there is challenges there. When I heard it, I was like, I don't know if that's a good idea because institutional ownership is quite low in housing, relatively speaking. But what if we applied this to farmland? Would this be a good idea? And like, as I say in the and I am not convinced this is a good idea. Okay, just to be clear with everybody, but I think it's easy at the fringe to be like, I think this is a good idea because I don't think we need another movie star owning a ranch in Montana. I'm not sure Bill Gates needs to be the largest landowner of farmland in the U.S. Like, I think most people could be like, yeah, we should stop that. But then you get like more to the middle, and there's this gray area where it would be very confusing, and I think it would maybe produce some unintended consequences. But I do agree that land affordability is a major barrier to entry for a lot of people. Even growing your farm, going from like 2,000 acres in Saskatchewan to 3, that is difficult with some of the appreciation of land prices. So just trying to create a discussion. We asked the farmers yesterday in the Farmer Rapid Fire about it, and the complexity showed through. There wasn't like, yes, there wasn't no. It was like, man, I don't know what the solution is. This is a problem. I don't know what to say about what the solution should be. Stuart, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is the land rent number doesn't necessarily follow the land price number when you get into like what we would call, land prices that are really high. So if you look at land rent in and around the cities of Calgary and Edmonton that are in tight, you can have land that's worth, upwards of, 50,000 an acre or something like that, or maybe even 100, depending on where it is. The rent that is charged for that land to the farmer is still in that, $100 to $200 an acre, depending on what's being grown, right? So I think the value of the land to the farmer is reflected more so in the price of the land rents than it is in the price of the land. And I think my opinion of this is that when you're going to be looking at purchasing land, it's a different, in some ways, it's a different business. If you're a farmer, you're in the business of farming. If you're also going to own land as a farmer, you should look at that as a separate business venture for yourself. So do lots of farmers own their own land? Yes. Is it good to own farmland? It has been very good to own farmland in the past, especially over the last 10 to 15 years. If you were owning farmland, you've seen significant capital appreciation on that, right? So will that continue? Don't know. But to be a really good farmer, what you need is access to farmland. You don't necessarily need to own it. It's nicer to own it, I get it, because it's a little bit more secure. But at the end of the day, everybody who owns farmland that's not farming needs someone to rent it too. So if you can develop those relationships with whether it's retired farmers or whether it's institutions who own the land, and that rental price will only go as high as farmers are willing to pay. So if rent prices are too high, it's because somebody's paying more than they should. Let's be honest on that. So, I mean, the farmers themselves should have the ability to set the rent price. And if they refuse to pay a rent price that's too high, if everybody's refusing to pay it, the landlord's not going to get it. So the market should be able to sort that out. So that's kind of how I look at it.
You've brought up some really interesting points. Now, where do I start here? First of all,
we only have so much time.
Yeah, I know. Because this is really a fascinating discussion. Because one of the theories I've heard, I have been talking to a lot of people about the profitability challenges, differences between Canada and the U.S. And I heard one yesterday: more rented land in the U.S. as opposed to in Canada, where more of it's owned. And so, in markets like this, you can't rely on that equity you have in your balance sheet to leverage against to try to buy yourself more time from an operating or a debt perspective. So that you need to, if you're going to be in the rented market, you really do need to have operational excellence, I think is more so even if you're a landowner. What's also interesting here is like the what would you call it? Like the ego part of the industry. Stuart, what's the first thing? You go to a meeting. Oh, hey, how much do you farm? We talk in acres, we talk in head. And then, so if you said, well, hey, I'm in like outside of Weyburn and, I have, 6,000 acres. What's the next question? Oh, rented or owned?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and so to your point, if that is true, we've got to you got to be able to get over yourself and not what the neighbors are thinking, but make sure you're operating your business the way that you can afford to and you need to, given your situation.
Yeah, and I mean, what we would talk a lot about at MNP is we talk about profitability from the farming operation itself. So if you own all your land, you don't make any money farming, but the land goes up by 10%, you can sit back and say, well, great, I made 10% this year on my land. Well, you could have made that without farming.
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to be making money on both those enterprises. If land appreciation isn't going to happen at the rate it's been happening, or any rate, let's say in the going forward future, then do you need to own it, or would you rather just rent it at this stage? And cash flow is a big problem in the industry, right? So to go out and buy more land is going to impact your cash flow significantly, whereas on a rental arrangement, you can get away with a much lower burden on your cash flow on an annual basis. And if you're really good at farming, you'll still make money.
No easy answers, Lyndsey.
No, but it speaks to, I think, what there's two parts to this. And so, and I say this from a very personal perspective because we have built our entire farming enterprise on other people's ground. Right. And we own 100 acres. And I say own very loosely because really the bank owns it. Let's be honest, right? So like you can run and expand a business on other people's ground. That has to be the business plan though. And then that business plan looks a little different than, if you own that ground. And it does change, the decisions you might make for that ground, et cetera. But to me, it's like, if you come at it exactly to Stuart's point of like, this is the farming enterprise versus this is we own land. Obviously they're related, but you can't just expect that the asset grows forever because there's a risk in that as well. And the second part is exactly to Stuart's point, return on capital is a real thing. So like you could easily take that money and park it somewhere and not do all the farming stuff and maybe do just as well, in which case the farming stuff still has to actually pencil out and make money, at least, how many out of how many years to continue. So I think like from the perspective of answering this question of how do young or beginner, and I know I don't qualify as a young farmer anymore, but when like there is no way that we would run a farm operation like we do if we had to own the ground we run on. There is just no way. So if you're going to figure out how to do it, it takes a different business model. And yes, that inherently potentially has other risks, but the other risk is you overextend yourself on debt and you can't pay your bills and then the bank owns it anyway, or you don't do it. You don't expand, you don't anything, and you just have a hobby. So there are risks to every decision, right? So it's what you decide to do.
Yeah.
The other thing, Shaun, that we got to be careful on with bringing in rules to limit ownership is if you do chase a bunch of investors out of the market and that somehow brings the price of land down, sure, you're going to have some young people maybe cheering, maybe some people who are looking to expand will be cheering, but you've got a whole bunch of people right now that have bought land at the price it's at. It's highly leveraged. And if the price of that land was to drop significantly, I would guess the banks are going to get a little nervous on some of the loans that are out there, and it's probably going to result in a cash call.
A little nervous?
Yeah. A lot nervous. Exactly.
A lot nervous. So,
to continue that on, Stuart, you have to be careful that you're not trying to corner farm businesses into a certain model. Right.
Exactly.
And so when I hear about like, hey, no outside investors whatsoever. Okay. Like what if it's a friend of mine from Calgary that wants to be a 50-50 owner and he's a super rich dude and you know what I mean? Like where does it start and where does it stop? And one of the things that is I think so interesting about agriculture is the different models that you can craft and create from a business perspective in order to make it go for you. Do we want, is agriculture healthier if everything's a 2,500 acre cash crop farm in Saskatchewan? There's a lot of loss of scale there. I don't know if it's healthier. It would definitely be different.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also farming is a capital intensive business, and especially for, let's say, a beginning farmer or someone who's looking to expand or whatever. What's exactly that? What's wrong with finding an outside investor who understands the longer play or whatever, who has some capital they're willing to invest. Yeah. So if we want investment in agriculture, if we want productivity, if we want whatever, it is a very slippery slope to go down, getting incredibly detailed on who can and who cannot. And granted, and provinces are dealing with this about having some high level restrictions on who can and can't own farmland. And I understand the reasoning for it, but it does, Shaun, you brought up this whole thought process because, there are parallels in the housing industry that what happens if that spills over to other industries? I mean, it's a valid question. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's a valid question.
I don't want to sound like I'm speaking in as a socialist on this comment, but the one thing I would worry about with who we allow to own farmland is the foreign ownership piece. Mm-hmm. And it's just simply because, if you wake up one day and 60% of your Canadian farmland is owned by a different country, and we do end up in, what are the consequences of that? I guess, what could result in a situation like that? And maybe it's nothing, but I mean, I think it's something that definitely, as a country, you need to be aware of and thinking about and have some level of concern about before you allow that to happen.
Hey, mining is another example of that, right?
Yep.
Where you question, like, okay, from a resource perspective, who, and we've seen some mergers and acquisitions turned down. Rio Tinto and Glencore, or Rio Tinto basically buying Glencore. That's in the news this week. That's gonna be a very interesting thing to watch. It is very fascinating, and there are again, it's like the foreign ownership. Okay, so this is a big discussion in the U.S., and it's a lot of times it's about China, and hey, rightly so.
Yeah.
But the largest foreign owner of farmland in the U.S. is actually Canadians.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Right?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, whoa.
But we love you.
Yeah. So we got to be careful when we talk about foreign ownership.
Exactly.
Like, what foreign ownership?
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's just it, is that it is more complicated and more, like most things, it is far more complicated and complex and nuanced. But Stuart, to your point, right, there are very good reasons why you would limit some forms of ownership. And I think most people can agree on those. It's as you work your way down, like, okay, then what about, and then what about, and then what about, that you really have to like sort of balance the bigger, broader picture.
I know almost a handful of personal examples I know where some farmers are going the other way. It's two friends or two people that have identified that they've got some like synergies, they've got some challenges. Let's put the sucker together and give ourselves some scale, and they're going the other direction. Like, so there's lots of different ways to make it work. I got to hop to something else. So hard stop. Okay. We are out of time. So
we're out of time.
Really appreciate the both of you. That was a really fascinating discussion today. Do very much appreciate it. If anybody has any feedback, you can send it to shaney@realagriculture.com. And again, thanks for hanging with us in this whole SiriusXM stuff. SiriusXM will have Rural Radio back in Canada January 16th. And please check us out there. Don't give up on us. We're coming back. I promise. Cheers, everybody.